Alright guys, I'm with Tyler and today we are going to talk about old school lag concepts versus modern lag concepts and how that will affect your speed. So forever, people have talked about lag and how much it creates speed in a golf swing, right? But it can also create a lot of timing in your golf swing.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about what the old school concept of lag is, which you see with a lot of long drivers, versus the new school concept of lag. So why don't you explain to everyone first what everyone used to talk about when they were talking about lag?
For sure, yeah, man. So that was all back in the day with I need to create just a gigantic angle right between that lead arm and the shaft. So you've got a lot of that left wrist cocking, right? That radial deviation pulling back, keeping that shaft as narrow in relation to your body and as angular to that left wrist as possible.
Right, and that creates a lot of timing.
I mean, it creates a ton of timing. The other thing it does, right, if you have a bunch of lag, right, on that lead wrist, it's impossible to do that with a wrist that's slightly in flexion, right? Your wrist doesn't bend that way. So in order to have all that lag, you're going to have some of that cupping, that extension in that left wrist in order to do that. Problem with that is that when I take my left wrist and I put it into extension, it opens the club face,
sure,
right? So you see a lot of guys back in, that think they need to create power by adding lag. You see them get very steep with the shaft and very open in the club face, right?
Sure.
So then that's going to create an environment where they've got to dump it under, stall their rotation, and flip it. But then like you said, it also creates a ton of timing, because if you're storing up and creating a bunch of angular force in that left arm, in that left wrist, that's got to be released at some point, right?
Sure.
And so your body is going to have to stall at some point to release that club face.
Sure.
And that club and all that lag that you stored up in that left wrist.
So I think you still see that with a lot of long drivers, but as I always like to say, they miss a pretty big grid quite frequently. So it's not the best if you're looking for accuracy, right? So now there's a new school kind of concept on lag,
right?
That involves a lot of flexion, and ulnar deviation.
Right. Yep.
So why don't you talk about that?
So that new school, right, is lead shoulder adduction, horizontal adduction, right? So that's that lead arm, that lead shoulder squeezing across the chest as we turn into it in the downswing, right? So we're going to have that squeeze as we leave that lead arm up and squeeze into that lead bicep against our chest, right? That's going to create a ton of torque in that shoulder and not necessarily have that shaft pull back, right? So we can create a more neutral wrist angle in that left wrist and use that force of that lead arm staying up and squeezing against the chest as we rotate and get everything around. Because from there, what's going to happen is if we create that adduction, that lag in that left arm, okay, down at the bottom we can get opened up, right? And then as the lower body stops rotating for a second, the chest will stop rotating and that left arm will come springing off that chest through the shot. You see Rory do that like crazy, right?
Sure. I think that, the more width you can maintain in a downswing, the easier it is to allow your body to control everything. Would you agree with that?
100%. I mean, the more you keep that constant radius in that arc, the less variables you have of an arc getting narrow and then having to release all that energy from it getting narrowed up with those wrist angles, right?
Sure. I think that concept has been used by good players forever. Like you always look at the club head tracer from back in the day, and they used to say, well, the club's always getting narrower, right? But if you look at the players back then, they used to drive pretty hard laterally,
for sure,
right? So that would give the impression that players are getting everything narrow. But I think if you look at a lot of old school players, they weren't actually getting narrow.
No.
All right, guys, so that's a quick chat about what different lag concepts will do for you. I think I'm a big fan of using the new school, as you can see from a lot of my players, and I hope it helps your game. Cool.